Exit light, enter Sandman. Let's talk about this major contender for the Kentucky Derby in our Spotlight series. One, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, and welcome to the Kentucky Derby Contender Spotlight series. This episode is on Sandman. Listen, we all love to reference Metallica. Why not? But before we get into talking about this Mark Casse runner, want to encourage you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, such as race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, weekly programs, as well as special episodes like this. So press that like and subscribe button. We got you covered for the Triple Crown, Saratoga, the Breeders' Cup. We got you covered for everything in this sport. All right. Well, like I said, we're going to be talking about Sandman this particular episode and talking about a horse that seems like he maybe finally put it together, but maybe not entirely. And we'll get into that when we talk about his pedigree a little bit, how quirky he is, it appears to be as a horse, how inexperienced and mature he still is. But some of that is, like I said, associated with his pedigree. But this is a horse that has long had talent. I got to see break his maiden at Saratoga this past summer. He was a horse that, like I said, there was always a lot of expectations around. Finally was able to put it together in that Arkansas Derby, getting an impressive victory that day over publisher Cole Battle and Cornucopian. But he is going to be a horse that needs a little bit of help. And the question is, what sort of price are you going to get on him in the Kentucky Derby? And could he be the second choice? He could be, potentially. I think horses like him and Sovereignty and certainly Tapan Street and maybe Tiz-tastic, a couple of other horses, one of the Baffert runners, maybe Rodriguez, will end up taking significant money. So I think, there's clearly journalism as a favorite. And then after that, there's a group of probably 5 or 6 horses that you could all kind of bunch together as being, I don't know, somewhere in that 4-1 to 10-1 range. And it's just a matter of where he falls in that range. It makes him more or less appealing to play from a betting standpoint. But let's talk a little bit more about him as a horse. Like I said, trained by Mark Casse and jockeyed by Jose Ortiz. I think that's notable. This is a horse that had some really questionable rides, in my opinion, the races leading up to the Arkansas Derby, which he was not able to win in the Southwest as well as in the Rebel. The Southwest, he had a poor beginning, and that's not necessarily on the jockey. He had a really bad start, made up a ton of ground late, came charging for second that day. In the Rebel, he broke well and was inexplicably taken all the way to the back of the field. And instead of just like letting this horse run more mid-pack. And it just felt like this is a horse very similar to Quiet Side on the Oaks side. If you've heard myself or my colleague Kaylee Shapiro talk about Quiet Side, that was another horse. Interestingly, Jose Ortiz took over both of them. But that was another horse who just always seemed to not get the greatest ride. And then all of a sudden, Ortiz gets up and suddenly she's getting much better rides, more aggressive rides, and the right sort of ride. So Sandman, same sort of thing. Jose hops aboard for the Arkansas Derby and the horse wins. Now he's going to be aboard for the Kentucky Derby. I mentioned those bouts of immaturity. He is sired by Tapit. Now, from a pedigree standpoint and from a standpoint of handling the 1.25 mile distance, Tapit is a great influence. He likes, this is a sire who passes on distance to his offspring. So going long on the dirt, that's what Tapits tend to do. However, there's a downside to Tapits, which is that they tend to be, let's just be honest, immature. That's kind of the nice way to put it. Head case would be the not nice way to put it. And you see that with Sandman. He's a quirky horse. He's got a big personality. And if you watch that replay of the Arkansas Derby, he's weaving all over the place in the stretch. And I don't think it had much to do with him being tired or weary or anything like that. It just looked more like maturity. I say that because if you go back and look at Tapit winning the Wood Memorial back in, 2004, when he won the Wood Memorial, it was eerily similar in that Tapit had his head cocked to the side, looking at the grandstands the entire way down. And he was kind of running in place with some other horses. And finally, in the last 100 yards, he got straightened out, put his head forward, and he passed 3 other horses to his inside and won the Wood Memorial. And you see some of that similarity with Sandman, that there's just immaturity there. There's greenness. There's, maybe just a little bit of quirkiness with how he runs. Now, Tapits tend to get better as they get older. Okay. So as he gets more experience, as he gets older, I think some of that's going to be run out of him and he's going to just mature out of that naturally. He's got influence with distorted humor underneath. I like that combination because you have the stamina up top, you get the speed underneath in terms of that influence from distorted humor. But like I said, he came up short in that Southwest, the Rebel, the Street Sense, which we'll talk more about in a minute, but did put it all together in that Arkansas Derby. He's going to be coming into Kentucky as a major player and one of the top 4 or 5 choices on the board. It's just a matter of where he falls in that continuum and what sort of a price he ends up being. Now, in terms of looking at his past performances, a couple of things should stand out. One, unlike a lot of horses that we'll talk about throughout this series, Tapan Street, Grande, some of these others, even Journalism only has 5 career starts. Rodriguez, I think, has 4 or 5 career starts. A lot of these horses are lightly raced. One of the things you'll see with Sandman is he's got a good foundation. This is a horse that started running June as a 2-year-old, broke his mane in August at Saratoga. I remember being on the rail that day, Dylan Davis aboard. Very impressive effort. Then goes to the Iroquois, just really doesn't do a lot of running that day, but also admittedly was towards the very back of the field, passed some horses late to finish 5th, then went to the Street Sense. This was a critical race because the winner of that race was Sovereignty, who goes on to win the Fountain of Youth as a 3-year-old and finish 2nd in the Florida Derby. The second place horse that day was Tiz-tastic. That horse goes on to win the Louisiana Derby. He finishes 3rd, just behind Tiz-tastic. Very, very close 2nd, 3rd place finish right there. But the key was he's had experience going 2 turns on the dirt at Churchill Downs. Now, he finished 3rd and only ran a 79 Beyer speed figure, but he stayed active. Mark Casse kept him in training. He gave him a little bit of a freshening, 6 weeks off basically from late October to mid-December, comes back, looks so good in that $125,000 optional claimer. I remember talking to Matt Dinnerman, the track announcer at Oaklawn after that race, and he said, finally feels like the light bulb went off for that horse. Well, the next race was that aforementioned Southwest. He blew the brake there and was way back early and had to make up a ton of ground late under Christian Torres and was able to do it. Then, to finish 2nd at least. Then goes to the Rebel. Again, breaks well that day. And what was so frustrating about the ride from Torres was it seemed like he was kind of like holding the horse back to keep him there. Instead of just letting him run out to be, 5th or 6th rather than 8th or 9th and be a little bit closer. And ultimately he comes up short again. Now, in the Arkansas Derby, a couple of things went his way. He got a 99 Beyer speed figure, a very good number for this crop. You don't see a lot of horses with a 99 or higher. You see very few horses that have broken 100. Rodriguez and Journalism are really the 2 primary ones in the race who have. And so Sandman's right there in terms of Beyer speed figures, does not need to improve much to be among the best of his generation. It already is among the best of his generation. But he had a couple of things work his way in that Arkansas Derby. One was that Cornucopian and Speed King went out and set incredibly fast fractions. They went 45-1 to the half-mile mark, and they went 110-1 to the 6 furlong mark. That is notable because they went slower going shorter in the Rebel. They went 45-3 and 110-4 to those fractions, going 1 mile and a 16th. Then stretching out to 1 mile and 8, they actually went faster. So you got this incredible pace to run at. Now, that said, that's going to look a lot like the pace likely in the Kentucky Derby. Sandman's going to need his pace setup. He's going to need to be a horse like Mind That Bird, like Rich Strike, who comes from well off the pace. Even Mage came from well back winning his Kentucky Derby. Mystic Dan a little less so last year, sitting a little bit more just kind of behind the leaders, mid-pack tracking trip. But he's going to need a pace setup. But the good news is they're probably going to go fast. Why? Because you have a lot of fast horses in this race. You have an Owen Almighty. You have a horse like East Avenue. You have a horse like Rodriguez. You have a horse like American Promise. You have a horse like Citizen Bull. You maybe have a horse like NYRA Daytona. You have a lot of horses who want to go fast. You have a horse like Tapan Street who's going to want to be close as well. So he should get the pace set up. The question is whether or not he's going to get the trip. Jose Ortiz aboard gives me a little bit more confidence that he is able to get the right trip. I think post position is critical. Does he get marooned out on one of the far posts? But even if he does, it's almost advantageous. He can let everybody run out in front of him, and he can just kind of get down towards the rail and save a lot of ground. I think you could say the same thing if he breaks on the inside, which is sometimes not a great spot. I would say it's only not a great spot if you have a ton of speed. In the case of Sandman, you don't have much speed. So listen, if he breaks slowly from the inside, everybody goes out in front of him. And again, he sits towards the back of the field. The key is what sort of a run does he make? Does he make that inside run that we saw from Rich Strike, that we saw from Mystic Dan last year, where he saved every inch of ground going around both turns? Or does he swing wide, a la Sierra Leone, a la Forever Young? That's a little bit more risky if you're giving up ground in a 1.25 mile race when other horses are saving and conserving it. So it's going to be a question of a trip. I like this horse. I think he's a very talented horse. He's number 2 on my Kentucky Derby contenders list if you watch my top 5 video. So there's a lot to like about him, but I do think there are questions about whether or not he gets the right trip, whether he gets the right setup, whether I think the pace is less of an issue. But notice one thing about him. $1.2 million purchase in the OBS March sales when he was purchased as a 2-year-old. This was a horse with great expectations. And this is a horse that a lot is expected from. He is a big horse. He is a little gangly at times because of his running style and just kind of weaving in and out. That immaturity needs to be cleaned up before the Kentucky Derby. He can't afford to be weaving around traffic coming down the stretch, because that's how you get into trouble. That's how you start interfering with other horses. That's how you just potentially have to, Jose Ortiz might be forced to go wide rather than go inside, because he might not trust the horse inside in tight spots because of that immaturity. So he goes wide, but you're giving up ground by doing that. That's what he did in the Arkansas Derby, and it didn't matter. But again, it will be tougher for him to be able to do that in the Kentucky Derby. But Sandman, again, is going to be one of your top choices in the Kentucky Derby this year. If he's closer to 10-1, I love him as a price. 8-1, 10-1 range. Yeah, sure. That's a legitimate bet based upon what this horse has done. I do think if there's, maybe 2 red flags about him. One is that quirkiness, that immaturity. The other is he's run 3 times at Churchill Downs. Is the best he's done is a distant 3rd place finish. Does he love the track? He has experience over the track, but does he love the track? Some horses really love Churchill Downs. A horse like Maxfield, remember, always loved Churchill Downs. Some horses really don't. I don't know if Sandman's one or the other in terms of being at either end of that spectrum, but he could be somewhere in the middle and maybe trending a little bit more towards not loving it there. So it's going to be interesting to see how he handles it. Admittedly, he hasn't been there since he was a 2-year-old. So coming back at 3, a little bit more maturity might be the ticket there. But something to pay attention to, not just on the day of the race, but in some of the workouts leading up. How is he moving over that surface at Churchill Downs? That's going to be a big question mark, I think, that I want to see answered before I feel comfortable wagering on a horse that's going to be coming from the back of the pack. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Kentucky Derby Spotlight Series on Sandman. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe today. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.